We're ready to begin discussing epithelium in this next video. Epithelium, or epithelial tissue as it's sometimes called, again, it covers most of our body and most or many of our organs, and it lines most of our body. We find epithelium all over. So we'll just say it acts as a covering. It has other functions. It is involved in secretion. It's also involved in absorption of substances. It's involved in diffusion or allowing diffusion to occur, like at what we'll define later as being our respiratory membrane that provides an interface between the environment in our lungs and the blood so that oxygen and carbon dioxide can move into and out of the blood. So epithelium, even though we are oversimplifying it and calling it a covering, it has many other functions, and we'll describe those when we describe specific varieties of epithelium in the very near future. We categorize epithelium, this is how we categorize it, into or by its properties of the cell shape and cell organization or orientation. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. Firstly, under cell shape, we have three shapes of epithelial cells: short and flat, cube-shaped, and more rectangular or columnar. So we call these cells that are short and flat, we call them squamous cells. Or squamous epithelium. We call these cells that are cube-shaped cuboidal. And we call these cells that are more tall and kind of thin on the side or in their width and column shape, we call them columnar. So we can have squamous, cuboidal, and columnar epithelium as three different types of cells found within epithelium. We find that the squamous cells, they have nuclei that are kind of flattish like this, and they kind of take on the overall shape of the cell. The cuboidal cells, they tend to have nuclei that are kind of circular or spherical, and they sit typically in the center of the cell. And then the columnar cells, they have nuclei that are a little bit more oblong or egg-shaped or oval-shaped. When we talk about cell organization, we really have two varieties of organization that we'll describe. If we have just one layer, we call that simple. Simple epithelium. If we have more than one layer, so more than one layer, we call that stratified epithelium. Okay, well, let's give some examples of combinations of cell shape and organization. Let me leave these up kind of at the top here for us. Okay, so if we have one layer of short, flat cells, we call that simple, squamous or squamous epithelium. If we have more than one layer, so more than one layer, of short flat cells. We'll kind of draw them. Here's our more than one layer like this. Look at they're kind of like big flat stones making a wall. There we go. They're flattish. Okay. We call this stratified squamous epithelium. Now, if we have one layer of cube-shaped cells or cuboidal cells, we call that simple cuboidal epithelium. And you guessed it, if we have more than one layer of cuboidal cells, so if we have more than one layer of cuboidal cells, we call that stratified cuboidal epithelium. And so we could do the same thing with columnar epithelium. If we have one layer of columnar cells, we call that simple columnar epithelium. If we have more than one layer of columnar cells, we'd call that stratified columnar epithelium. We're going to spend our next segment of the video describing each variety of epithelium and where it's found and what kind of function it has. I'll also spend some time showing you some examples of these varieties of epithelium as you would see them under a microscope. Okay, we're ready for simple squamous epithelium. And as you remember, it's simple, so we see one short, flat layer of cells. Not very thick. In fact, it's really, really thin. Sometimes we have places where we just have one layer of these cells, and then like in the lungs, and then actually blood vessels have another layer, but it's a separate layer. So we have two different sheets of simple squamous epithelium. They come really close to one another, and they're only sometimes about half of a micron thick. So they're very, very, very thin. What does this do? What is its function? Well, one of its functions is that it's very good at allowing substances to diffuse through it. So diffusion of molecules. That's an E, molecules through its surface, like oxygen and carbon dioxide. Those are two good examples of molecules that diffuse through a sheet or maybe just two sheets of simple squamous epithelium. We also find that in specialized types of blood vessels, it acts as a filtration membrane. And sometimes we find simple squamous epithelium in tissues where lubrication is necessary. So it secretes lubricating, what we call serous fluid. As part of a serous membrane. These serous membranes are found around many of our organs, like the heart has its pericardium, and the lungs have pleura, and the GI tract and the abdominal viscera are surrounded and covered by peritoneum. These membranes need to be slippery so they don't have too much friction and become inflamed. And so we find that simple squamous epithelium within those serous membranes secretes a lubricating serous fluid. It's kind of a slippery, I hesitate to say oily, but it's a little bit of, it's got some viscosity to it or some thickness to it, and it's a slippery substance, and it reduces friction. Let's take a minute and look at some examples of simple squamous epithelium. Okay, what you see is a slide from what's called the Virtual Slide Box, a website hosted and put together by the University of Michigan. It is an excellent resource for viewing from home tissues that have been prepared. So what we're going to do is, as we click the mouse, kind of taking our time, we're going to zoom in. I kind of have to wait for it no longer to be pixelated. And we're zooming in. And this is the lung. What we're going to look at, or what we will see in just a minute, are these little tiny pockets called alveoli. And within the alveoli, this is the region where we have oxygenated air, and that oxygen is diffusing into the bloodstream, into pulmonary capillaries. And what we can see here on this slide, it doesn't really maybe at first glance look like that much, but we can see chains. We can see one cell layer forming a chain of short, flat cells. Let's see if we can kind of scroll a little bit. Here's a good example of an alveolus. So we kind of look into this pocket here, and we see one short, flat layer of cells. So now this isn't a cell all the way around here. This is actually comprised, this wall that I'm tracing along is comprised of many short, flat cells laid end to end to end. Just like if you took maybe pancakes and laid them not on top of one another, but side to side, or one next to another, and made a wall with them. So these are, this is a great example of simple squamous epithelium. And where is this? This is within the air sacs of the lung, called the alveoli of the lung. I've highlighted here another example of really some short, flat cells. You can see this wall right here, this almost perfect circle of a wall that has that is visible. And this actually may be an example of a pulmonary capillary, which also has within it a layer of short, flat cells called simple squamous epithelium. When we find it here, we call it the endothelium. You won't be responsible for knowing that term now, but later on when we describe blood vessels, we'll talk about the endothelium. So let's complete our slide and describe where we can find this simple squamous epithelium. And so we'll go to that last example. Let's put here, we'll say examples in the body. One would be alveoli of lungs. Number two, we could say the lining of blood vessels. That lining is called the endo, meaning inside, thelium of blood vessels. Just a third example is the lining of the ventral body cavities. like the peritoneum. That's an example. Okay. All right. Well, that's simple squamous epithelium. I hope that that you have an appreciation for this variety of epithelium, what it looks like underneath the microscope, its function, and some examples of where you would find it. If you know all of this information and can identify simple squamous epithelium, you will be well served on our next laboratory evaluation coming up shortly.